everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Crime Chronicles with Mark Jones. Guess who I'm here with? He wasn't going to solve the crime and say Mark Jones. Mark, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, why you're staring like the audio's not working.
Well, not I was just hearing the music is all that I was for the second.
Oh, you got the delay. All right, now you're in. I told everybody, welcome back to Crime Chronicles with Mark Jones. I'm here with Guess Who, and we just saw you stare at the camera. So now we figured it out. You're on a little delay, but you're here now.
Yeah, I'm trying not to look too bright. So to speak.
If I need a little powder,
if I move my face one way or the other,
right.
Anyways, like I'm in a police interrogation room or something. So it's fitting, I guess, for this.
That is fitting. To start off, so we got the episode today, the assassination attempt of Pope John Paul II. Let's first start. We'll be really short about it. Then we'll do that after. I always start to get into questions and I forget. Let's show the episode first. But just do what you do normally when you shortly tell people why you recorded this episode.
All right. Well, first off, I happened to be visiting Italy last summer, September, I believe. I was there on business, and so I decided to shoot a couple of episodes. You're going to see some a little later on, and not sure when. While I was in Rome, I visited the Vatican and just stood out in St. Peter's Basilica amidst all the tourists, some of who walked in front of the camera and had to start over many times, talking about the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. I remember very well when this happened back in the early 1980s. And as far as the timing goes, we decided to air this at this time because we're coming up on Easter. This is Holy Week, or for a lot of Christians. So thought it's in a perverse way, I guess, an apropos time to air an episode about the attempted assassination of a pope.
All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the episode.
Hi, Mark Jones here, and welcome to Crime Chronicles. On this segment, we have a special international edition of Crime Chronicles. And coming to you now from Vatican City, in the heart of Rome, middle of Italy. On this segment, we go back to 1981. Take a look at the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. Well, in this segment, we take a look at the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II, right behind me here in Vatican Square in Vatican City. The late 1970s and early 1980s were rife with assassinations and assassination attempts against world leaders in the United States and other countries as well. In 1978, Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flynt was shot outside a Georgia courtroom and paralyzed for life. The following year, civil rights leader, National Urban League president Vernon Jordan was shot in Indiana. Turns out, both men were shot by the same man, Joseph Paul Franklin, who shot and killed other people as well. In 1980, former Beatle John Lennon was shot outside his apartment building in New York City and died. In March 1981, President Ronald Reagan and 3 other men were seriously wounded by an assassin in Washington, D.C. Also in 1981, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated and murdered by members of his own military. Lord Louis Mountbatten, a close relative of Queen Elizabeth II, was killed in 1980 by elements of the Irish Republican Army. So that brings us to May 1981 and the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. Now I'm here at the Vatican, the heart of Rome and the heart of Italy. This is a city and a country that is no stranger to violence throughout its several thousand-year history. After all, this is where the Roman Empire was founded and started. And the Catholic Church is also no stranger to violence as well, both perpetrated by the Church itself and against the Church. But In the 20th century, once World War II was over, the Catholic Church's involvement in subversive activities, political persecution, violent persecution was pretty much a thing of the past. So why would a person want to assassinate a non-violent leader or a man who advocated non-violence but resistance nonetheless to oppression like John Paul II? Who would want to kill a pope and why? The Catholic Church in its 2,000 plus year history has had plenty of enemies. After all, Pope is not just the head of the church, he's also a political figure as well. He's looked to for leadership by Roman Catholics the world over. Even though the Vatican City is probably the smallest country in the world in terms of area, in terms of population, its political impact goes way beyond its actual size. Pope John Paul II was anointed Pope or appointed to the position of Pope in 1978 upon the death of John Paul I, who succeeded Pope Paul VI. Now, John Paul II was unique in one respect. He was the first non-Italian Pope in over 400 years. Pope John Paul II was the native of Poland. Poland was in the news in the late 1970s, and particularly the early 1980s. In the early 1980s, especially 1980 itself, Poland, under the domination of the Soviet Union for several decades, began to sow the seeds of unrest, more specifically in the form of a labor union or labor movement. In Gdansk, Poland, and mind you, Poland is John Paul II's home country, a labor movement called Solidarity, composed mostly of dock workers and electricians, and led by a man named Lech Walesa, who eventually became president of Poland, rebelled against Polish leadership, which was under the domination of the Soviet Union. John Paul II was very vocal in his support of Solidarity. This did not make him many friends in the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union. Was that the reason for the assassin? We still don't know to this day. All popes, all world leaders have plenty of enemies. All popes are the enemies of people who simply despise the Catholic Church or who simply despise the Pope for his authority. Who knows? But in this case, this Pope was much more outspoken on political matters, particularly his opposition to Soviet-style communism, than his predecessors had been. Well, by May of 1981, Pope John Paul II was probably the best known Pope the world had seen in quite some time. He had attracted a lot of admirers and also made a lot of enemies, as most popes do. But what would drive a person to actually want to see the Pope killed, let alone actually carry the deed out? Well, in May of 1981, as he was being paraded through the crowds here in Vatican City, greeting followers and well-worshippers, a man named Mehmet Ali Atka from Turkey shot the Pope while he was riding in his, some call the Pope Mobile. One person, a tourist, captured most of the event on camera, not the shooting itself, but the just before and the just after. The man remarked on how surprised he was at how calm the Pope was being shot. Atka was subdued by a lot of onlookers, including a very angry nun, supposedly, who struck him with her purse. Also, a Vatican guard whose job primarily is ceremonial, symbolic, and perhaps some crowd control, swung into action for one of the few times, actually having to carry out law enforcement, and Atka was immediately subdued. Now, with Atka taken in custody, the question remained, would the Pope survive, and why did Atka shoot and try to kill the Pope? Well, Pope John Paul II was taken to hospital. Fortunately, his wounds, while serious, were not life-threatening, and he survived. The question remains, why did Mehmet Ali Atka try to kill Pope John Paul II? Atka was Turkish. Did he have ties to criminal organization? Well, it turns out he had ties to an organization known as the Turkish Wolves, or euphemistically called the Turkish Wolves, which is a far-right organization. So why would a member of a far-right organization be so hostile to someone who was critical of the far left, i.e. Soviet-style communism in Poland? Was politics his motive? Who knows? He changed his story several times as to exactly what he did and why he did it. But in any case, he was sentenced to a long prison term. Now, some suspected that he was working on behalf of the Bulgarian government, which was more or less a Soviet Union satellite back in the early 1980s, but that was never definitively established. So his motives remained somewhat of a mystery. While the Pope's assassin was serving a lengthy prison sentence, one question was, what would be John Paul II's attitude toward the man who tried to kill him? Being a man who was the head of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and who preached love and forgiveness, and so forth, New Testament values, would John Paul II forgive his accused assassin? In 1983, 2 years after he was shot, while Atka was in prison, Pope John Paul II did indeed visit his assassin in prison and stated publicly that he forgave him for his actions. But he didn't call for his release, not at that time. He still had to serve his sentence and still had to answer for what he had done, both to the Pope and to the public, for this assassination attempt. In the year 2000, Pope John Paul II, realizing his death was not very far away, did indeed advocate for the pardon and release of Mr. Eichner. And so he was released, but his legal problems didn't end there. He was wanted in his native Turkey for a bank robbery that occurred in 1979. And so he was extradited from Italy to Turkey to serve a 10-year sentence for that 1979 bank robbery. But in any case, the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II perhaps presents a demonstration of restorative justice, the victim of a violent crime forgiving the person who tried to kill him. Mark Jones here with Crime Chronicles, an international edition from Vatican City. See you next time.
Okay, so we're back.
Yeah, there we go. So I thought the thing was still playing. So I can see when you were recording people walking behind you, and when I was watching it being edited, I'm like, no one walked in front of him. That's strange. And then
Oh
you
no, they
said in the
did.
beginning, people walked in front of you.
I mean, and yeah, well, needless to say, there's a lot of editing going on here, both on my part and Mark's part. Some of those tourists walking by looking at their phones in front of me.
Uh,
But it wasn't very crowded. I forgot what
yeah.
day was that, a Sunday? I'm not sure what day of the week it was.
Mhm.
But it was fun. Just all I can say, it was fun doing that. Quite
Does
frankly,
anybody
and
ask you what you're doing?
no, for one thing, most of the people walking by don't speak English in the first place. Some would just
Yeah.
kind of look but I say that people walk in front of the camera. Actually, people are. Most people go out of their way to be courteous in situations like that.
Yeah, they do.
They don't want to mess with you, and they think you're doing something important.
Yeah.
And of course, we're saving the world here, so it is important. Uh, but I had Martin does such a good job with the overlays and all that. I mean,
Mhm.
people who watch this, I mean, I do the video and I do the commentary and all that, but the overlays, the pictures and whatnot he puts in there really add a lot to this. I just got to say that does a great
So
job.
we ended up with a lot more. I don't want to say a lot more questions. We still had so many um, unanswered questions, even though the person was finally pardoned and extradited. But so many more questions. We never really got down to the answer of why.
No,
Do you think he told the Pope in their private meeting why?
I don't know. I could sit here and speculate, but the short answer is I don't know. And again, he changed his story several times as to how he went about this.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that's kind of the Cage's kind of assassin, I suppose. But maybe he was just a loner. But it just doesn't seem to fit that a guy with his history would just decide to go to a foreign country and assassinate the Pope. It didn't really add up. But on the other hand, they say that like Lee Harvey Oswald, now apologies to conspiracy theorists out there, I think he acted alone. And they say he had ties to organizations. He had ties, but he wasn't tied up because nobody wanted anything to do with him. Maybe that's the way this guy was. He was a loner in Turkey. Who knows? So I could, stumble and stutter around, but couldn't give you a
Mhm.
real firm answer on that.
Well, conspiracy theorists and skeptics, because you had skeptics at the time saying, "I don't know if the Pope really forgave him. It's a photo op. It's all of
Yeah.
these things." And
Well, I was thinking when I watched this just now, it occurred
Mhm.
to me that some years ago, a church that I used to attend was burned by an arsonist, and so the minister of the church went and visited the guy in jail. Now, did he do that because he genuinely was concerned about the guy, or because he thought that it was expected of him to do this, or maybe some combination of both? We have to get inside somebody's head and know what they're thinking to really know that. But yeah, interesting story though. And the thing that I point out toward the end, I mentioned a term called restorative justice, and it's something that's not very well known outside academic circles, unfortunately. But it really just comes down to whether a person forgives the person who wronged them in some way, or who committed a crime against them, and an attempt to restore things to the way they were. Now you can't do that when you shoot somebody, but So perhaps the Pope was trying to set an example, or perhaps he was being political. Who knows? I don't know.
We all would love to think we can forgive somebody that does something like, maybe I get robbed, you beat me up, you stabbed me or something. I can forgive you. But I don't know, honestly, if something life altering happens, like you shoot me and I'm paralyzed for life, if I'm forgiving you ever.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't either. I think, and I say this in front of classes all the time. You
mhm.
don't know what you're going to do until you're in that situation. And you hope you're never in that situation. Back
Right.
in the, if you recall, back in the mid 1990s, when Tim McVeigh blew up that building in Oklahoma City and killed over 150 people or whatever it was, and his execution date was nearing, and the press interviewed some of the people, the relatives of the people who were killed, and about, how do you feel about this, and the emotions ran from I've tried to forget about it and move on to I've forgiven him, to some people saying they want to light the fuse and let it run for about a mile before he dies. So the emotions are all over the place, and I say you can sit here and say all you want to, this is what I would do, but you don't know until that happens to you.
It's the age old hypothetical. I always talk about it when somebody says, I wouldn't do this for $1 million. It's easy to say that until the briefcase is actually in front of you and it's open, right?
I'll do one. I'm not against that one. But yeah, the Pope. So
Mhm.
this restorative justice thing was, I think, kind of an element. It's something that a lot of people trace it to, say, Native American traditions, trying to restore or remember the community and so forth. But it really just boils down to, kind of the New Testament ideals of forgiveness, which the Pope was, at least superficially, what he was thinking deep down inside, we don't know, but at least superficially, he was trying to put into practice. And something else, Keone, that occurred to me was last week I was in Chicago. I was at a deli in a section of town, the Ukrainian village, is still heavily populated by Eastern Europeans, Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, so forth. Of course, those folks aren't getting along very well now. But I was in a delicatessen. There was a picture of Lech Walesa on the wall, the guy who's at the heart of the solidarity movement in Poland, that ignited this kind of this revolution in Eastern Europe, if you will. So it would seem that there was definitely a motive for trying to get back at this Pope for being so supportive of efforts to uh, debunk Soviet-style communism. So the motive is definitely there.
And correct me if I'm wrong. It was after this attempt. Is that when we started seeing the Pope vehicle with the bulletproof
I
glass?
believe so. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and yes, yeah. You notice in this, of course, you saw that there was a still with
Hmm.
a little red circle around Akka as he was pointing the gun, and he was riding an open car. Now, whether or not he always does that now, I don't know. I don't follow the Pope's movements that closely. And this Pope, though, was a lot of popes aren't particularly well known outside Catholic circles.
Hmm.
But this pope was probably the best, at least in my estimation, the best well known because of first off it being a bit novel, being from Poland and not to be an Italian, but also because of his outspoken criticism of communism. It made him a hero in the West to a lot of people.
So he's the first non-Italian Pope, or he was the first in a very long time.
He was the first non-Italian pope in like 400 plus years,
Okay.
and now we have the guy there now is Argentinian,
Hmm.
but is of Italian descent. So, uh, but he's well known in his own. He could be a commentator on MSNBC, but
Yeah.
besides that,
One of the things you talked about at the beginning was the amount of different arenas that the church was involved with uh, prior to World War II. They were a lot more involved in it. And, people will say they still are. It's just not seen, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. But it was they were very intertwined into the political aspects of what happened around Europe.
well, the Catholic Church has a history of militancy. I mean, if you
Hmm.
go back to the Middle Ages and the
Knights of
Crusades in the
Templar,
Middle
yep,
East,
Crusades. Mhm.
and during World War II, they were, I think, controversially, if that's even a word, silent when it came to the activities of the fascist government there. But they just kind of agreed to leave each other alone. Uh, but as I said, you recall last week, the people watching us now probably weren't watching then, on your trivia show, the Keonywood Squares thing. I don't know if you would do me a favor or not, but your final question was to us, name the smallest country in the world by area. And I thought, thank you very much. It gave me a chance to plug this because the smallest country in the world by area is Vatican City. It's I don't like less than a
It's
square
funny. I
mile.
did not the best things I do are not even planned. When I plan things, they don't kind of come out the way I
Yeah,
want.
yeah,
So I was just asking random questions to random people, and then it was between that and two other questions. And I thought since I did, because in Kuno, of course, we kind of just make it up as we go. I just thought that was the best thing um, to do. But you're right. You're talking about crusades. You're talking about being heavily influenced with European kings. A lot of influence from the church and from the Pope. But after World War II, that all died down. The whole will just leave each other alone aspect. You can understand it because if they talked out against it, we know what would happen.
right. And but like I
Um,
said, it's an entity that, as I said in the video, even
mhm,
though it's what a square mile big or whatever it is,
mhm,
uh, that and you can walk it in 15, 20 minutes,
mhm.
the whole country, so to speak. But there are people, they have official relations with the countries, they have ambassadors, they have consulates and so forth. Governments send ambassadors just to the Vatican.
They have a good
Uh,
GDP too.
yeah, and yeah. So not a poor entity, by the way. Uh, but yeah, they're unlike some other very small countries like Andorra and San
Mhm.
Marino and Monaco. Their influence extends far beyond their size because they're not political leaders, but they are kind of, I guess, unique in that they are a country that's whose spiritual influence or moral influence plays very strongly outside their boundaries and outside Europe, for that matter, too.
Well, to some people in this world, what the Pope says is extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Um,
hard. It's hard for me to relate. I didn't grow up Catholic, so
mhm,
I'm not a person that goes around bashing Catholics or any other religion
mhm.
for that matter. So I really can't relate to it. Uh, but yeah, this Pope was interesting in quite a few ways.
Awesome. Now, a episode that a lot of people liked. Actually, it did much better than I expected. I thought it would do good. It did much better than I expected. The Hamilton Burr episode that was played before this one. Um,
Yeah,
which is
and
very interesting because the dueling aspect, of course, was what most people keyed into the most.
yeah,
We
and
saw
every
that
time
one.
now
Go
so
ahead.
every time you say or read Hamilton Burr, I think about Perry Mason because the prosecutor's name was Hamilton Burger. But so anyway, well, my mind goes there. My wife watches Perry Mason all the time, so that's.
Oh, she doesn't like Ironside.
Well, she's got to go through Perry Mason, and then I guess then on Ironside. So but
One of the things that someone said in the comments was, "Could you imagine if dueling was legal today?"
well, and I think I had like oh, thank you very much. You made some kind of smarty comment too, but
I
someone
said there'd be
else,
there'd be less
right?
population, but yeah.
Well, this is what a friend of mine said to me on social media. Uh, his he had a statement. He was a retired police officer, and without saying it in so many words, that mentality is still alive and well. And he said, I don't know how many calls I went to where there was a shooting involved or a stabbing or something like that. And it boiled down to a guy's honor, without using those words, the guy's honor was at stake and he had no choice but to retaliate and defend his honor. And so that mentality is still alive and well. It's just not so much still alive and well in the upper classes like it was back then.
Yeah, I'm not dueling from honor. You don't have to like me, and I don't have to like you, and I'll go this way, you go that way.
Yeah, but I mean, you picture all these geriatric
Yeah.
politicians we have now, all these people in their 80s. I mean, Maxine Waters and Joe Biden and Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer, having a duel. I mean, they couldn't even pick up the weapon. I mean, they'd have to hire someone to do it for them, like the guys in the Middle Ages did. But yeah, so the mentality's not totally dead. I really enjoyed that episode, though. You talk
Mhm.
about interacting with interesting people, and that I didn't know what to expect when I flew into LaGuardia and took a Uber or whatever to this little town in New Jersey, not far away from Weehawken. And so I caught another Uber to Weehawken. What kind of neighborhood am I going to, and whatever. And it was absolutely beautiful. You could see from the scenery there. You look over the Hudson River above on a bluff, pretty high up, and look at the Manhattan skyline. And yeah, and people were very nice. They were kind of move out of the way, hope I'm not bothering you, that type of thing. So it was a fun experience too. Just a beautiful day, and they really have done that area very well. It's worth a visit if you're in the area. In fact, if you want to get away from Manhattan, away from Times Square and all that, take a water taxi across the river to Weehawken and walk around Hamilton Park. It's good.
I know sometimes the things that you think won't be exciting actually is the most relaxing and the best thing
Yeah.
you can do on a trip. You can do all, that's always surprising to me. Which episode was more fun for you?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I That's tough. I mean, look, I was in Italy. What can I say?
Yeah,
It's not too shabby, right?
not too
And
shabby.
I went on to Florence, and we have something coming up there about a serial killer that
Hmm.
operated in Florence back about 40 years ago or so. But the okay, you talk about the stuff that's unplanned, if you will. The trip to Weehawken was a last minute thing. I had been to Buffalo, and I asked my wife, tongue in cheek, "Is it okay if I go to New York and do that?" She said, "Sure, go ahead." I was going to do it the whole time, but and so it was kind of a spur of the moment thing, and I didn't know really what to expect because, but it was quite a bit of fun though. And then once I got finished filming this thing, I walked down it was very high up, so it was a lot of steps down to the river, and I had dinner at a nice restaurant, and then I caught a water taxi over to Manhattan. I heard a little jazz band, get on the water taxi and go back across the river to Weehawken and back to my hotel and gone the next day. So that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Awesome. So you'll take Hudson River over Italy is what I got. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what he said. Um,
I'll take Italian food over any food, though. I tell you
so
that much.
you asked a lot of, you know, questions about the person who attempted to assassinate the Pope, but what conclusion? I mean, did you have your own thought or opinion?
I don't because now, and I'm sure there are people who know a lot about this guy than
Mhm.
I do. Um, Plenty of people, and so maybe they have their own conclusions, but nothing's ever really been definitively spelled out as to why this guy did what he did. I believe he served his time in Turkey and then got out from there as well. And maybe he's too old to do anything now. I think he's still living.
Well, he had to
Um,
go serve the 10 years in
yeah,
Turkey, you
yeah.
said.
So there, I mean, there he was. It was a bank robber. So is a bank robber, would they be part of an organization? Would an organization sanction something as stupid as a bank robbery even in Turkey? Or was he just really a lone wolf that decided to go out on his own? But we've never gotten anything to definitively prove otherwise. But a lot of stuff that the Soviet government did, the Bulgarian government did, and the Eastern Bloc countries did back in the 70s and the 80s during the Cold War is still a mystery, and it will always be a mystery. And even if there is information released from those governments about the stuff they did, we'll never know whether or not to believe it. So it's highly suspect. So we don't
What
know.
were a couple of the different stories that he gave? Did any of them stick out to you as
I think he said he just may have hinted that he was acting on orders from the Bulgarian government. Notice I said
Mhm.
Bulgarian government and not the Polish government, because the Polish government would figure since the Pope was sowing so much unrest in Poland, or from the Soviet government itself. But the Soviet government was good at getting its satellite countries to do its dirty work for them, so that would kind of go hand in hand with the Bulgarian government. There's never been a suspicion that I don't know if this guy was Muslim. The vast majority of people who live in Turkey are Muslims. There's no suggestion that that he was tied to any kind of a radical Islamic organization in Turkey or in the Middle East. So the best explanation we got is this guy did it, and he'll probably go to his grave uh, keeping it a secret. Is exactly why he did it.
well, that makes sense because if it's a radical organization or anything like that, they're going to claim it. That's the whole point of them doing
Right.
it. They
Exactly.
want to claim responsibility
Yeah.
for it. So that would make sense. Um, I don't know if that sounds like a bad producer. I didn't look up to see if he was still alive or not.
I'm pretty.
Um,
I'm pretty sure he is. I'm a bad host.
yeah,
And don't you like that picture behind me? Isn't that a great picture?
I do. That's a pretty cool picture. When did you take that and where?
That was in Stockholm.
Okay.
My wife stopped on the street and said, "Hey, you want a picture?" Click. There it is.
You're in
So
Stockholm. You should have recorded a case up there if somebody ever went through Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome and the assassination of the Swedish prime minister case has never been solved. Happened some years back too, but that was
In
before I started
Stockholm?
all this stuff. Yeah, yeah. The
Jeez.
Swedish prime minister was went to a movie
Hmm.
unaccompanied, which they did, unaccompanied, and I was shot either going to the movie or coming from the movie on the street. I
When was
mean,
this?
imagine that. You
What year was this?
I think back in the 1980s. But imagine
Oh,
a head of
wow.
state walking to a movie on the street.
Yeah, today,
Or
now,
a head of
right?
state, head of government. Yeah, or any
Yeah.
country for that matter. But that's how shocking it was in Sweden for something like that. Stuff just didn't happen in Sweden. But,
Well, it's also funny. You would think, if someone's a head of state or something and they're not popularly known, that they can be in another country and walk in regular clothing and no one, because I wouldn't know who that was, but
right.
apparently somebody did.
Yeah. So there we
All
are.
right. So there we go. That was the episode on the assassination attempt of Pope John Paul II. We also talked about the Hamilton Burr. Please go out and check the Hamilton Burr episode. Now you have that name in my head, Mark. Thanks a lot. Also, go back and check older episodes on the Scottsboro Boys, Wyatt Outlaw, and Abraham Hangerman, which is still climbing up there as our number one episode. So that one's still getting a lot of views.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing, John. Now, of course, YouTube runs its business much better than I could. I know, but I wish that instead of asking people to subscribe, they would just say follow, because people, when I say subscribe, people think, well, you have to pay for something, or
mhm.
you're going to get bombarded with emails or something like that, and that's not the case. It's just following it. But the term they use is subscribe. So I'm just
Yeah,
asking people, please consider liking and subscribing, and of
yeah,
course, talk about how great the host is.
yeah. All right, Mark. We will see you guys. Well, we'll see you at the end of the month, next month, but we will have 2 episodes of Crime Chronicles coming out next month. Please watch, please joy, like, and follow by hitting the subscribe button.
Right.
It doesn't cost you anything, but it makes a big difference for us. Thank you all for your support. Thank you, Samuel Jones, for the compliment that you gave us at the beginning of the show. No relation. Right?
Samuel Mark Jones is his full name, just so you know.
Oh, Jesus. I'm ending it on that one.